Um, you have done a historically important work, which is No-Fire Zone, which is the only documented evidence about Tamil genocide. You will remain a hero in Tamil's history. I think that you went beyond your journalistic professional framework to produce the documentary. What is the reason for your extra interest in Tamil issues?
Well, you know what? I don't think I did go beyond my journalistic duty. I mean, it is a curious thing that I mean, my involvement in this is an accident. Something which the Rajapaksa government could never understand. They always had to think. They always thought there must be some motive, that maybe I was being paid by the Tigers or something, even though I actually condemned the Tigers as well for committing war crimes. But the truth is that I was asked to make the first film. My expertise, I was asked to do it because I have made films about war crimes. I'd made a number of films about war crimes, in investigations into allegations of war crimes by the coalition in Iraq and various other areas in Africa. I'd made a few. And so I was asked to make this film on the basis of my journalistic expertise.
Right.
So when I started looking into this and I started investigating this and collecting the evidence, what happened to me was that I was so, I mean, you know, obviously I was aware to some extent of what had happened, but I wasn't fully aware of what had happened until I started looking into it.
Okay.
And it was the discovery of the extent of the war crimes, the discovery of the extent of the cover-up, the discovery of the extent to which the international community and the UN had failed, that in a sense drove me to look further into the story. Right. When we made the first television documentary, you know, it represent, you know, we had brought together, I mean, it's important to remember that, of course, Tamils knew very well what had been going on, and they had been shouting and screaming about what had been going on, but nobody had been listening. And I think it's an irony, not something of which I'm proud at all, that it was only, you know, it was really when we made the film that the world started paying attention. I actually think that is not a source of pride, that's a source of shame and embarrassment, because there were people saying what was going on. But anyway, I then made the film, and of course what happened was that first of all, when I made the film, we started getting more and more evidence, and it became very clear to me that we had not finished telling the story, and it became clear to me that we needed to make another film, and I went back to Channel 4 and I said, you know, I think we should make another film. But the other thing that happened at the same time, of course, was that the Sri Lankan government and government supporters then denounced the film. They said the evidence was faked, and they also tried to prevent the film being seen. And so these two things came together also, that I was getting more and more evidence because, of course, you know, once we made that first film, people thought, there's somebody listening. And so the evidence, we started collecting more and more evidence. Now, at every stage, whenever I got new evidence, I didn't care where it came from. I automatically did not trust it until I had checked it out and authenticated it. So in a sense, for me, it was irrelevant where you know, the information came from, because whether it was a trusted source or a source I didn't know, I always approached, you know, I always individually authenticated and evidenced everything that we used. But that's what happened in a sense, is that, and we were able to prove, first of all, that everything in the first film was true. Secondly, the more, you know, the more the government lied, the more we were able to get more evidence, which proved they didn't. And the thing became a sort of process, and we made the second film. And then the process continued. By then, it had almost become a sort of responsibility to tell this story. It's become a duty to tell, a journalistic duty to tell the story. And the fact that, you know, the government had tried to stop the film, tried to ban it, had organised, you know, had persuaded other countries, Malaysia, Nepal, India, and so on, to try and ban it. It made me all the more determined that this story would get out. And that's my duty as a journalist. So that's why, I suppose, we went on, and then we made the third film. And the third film, yes, the third film, it's a feature documentary, so it's big, it's longer, it has more nuance, and it is, in a sense, a campaigning tool. I'm not ashamed of that. It's a tool for getting the truth out. But I still think that's journalism in a way.
Yeah. Okay. So you stayed within the journalistic framework anyway. So you mentioned about this international community, the so-called international community, which are the imperialist countries for us anyway. So basically, the imperialist countries such as US, UK, or France, they were behind the genocide in a way committed in Vanni. Why do you think? Why was it's so important for them to make such an act? While there are other organizations fighting in the other part of the world, such as Kashmiri self-determination struggle, Indian Maoist resistance, Philippines Communist Party, which controls several areas in Philippines. So why?
No, I have to sort of distance myself from your position, because I'm a journalist and I don't take a view on as a journalist and as a director of this film, I don't take a view on. I mean, it is my job solely to look at what happened, and to decide, and to take a view on what happened. Now, it's my view. I take a view on the fact that the international community failed.
Right.
I take a view on the fact that you did see an extraordinary alliance of countries, in effect, backing the government regime. I can think of no other situation in which you had, America and China, you had India and Pakistan, you had Israel and Iran, all effectively being on the side of the government. Now, you can look at the reasons for that and try and analyze the reasons for that, and there are a number. One of them is, of course, that Sri Lanka has strategic value because of its position. It has no resources as such, but as far as we know at this stage, but it has a strategic position. You also have the notion that everybody likes dealing with a single powerful unitary government. It's just easier. And if that government is corrupt, then to be perfectly frank, it's easier to deal with that corrupt government than a corrupt autocratic government. It's easier to deal with, than in terms of international geostrategic terms, than a democratic or accountable country where it is more complex. But I mean, also you have to look at what the Tigers did and their responsibility. The Tigers were only focused on the war. They were only focused. They did not. The diaspora was focused on supporting the Tigers. The Tigers and the Tigers had taken, had done a number of things which had lost them support, or lost them potential support amongst human rights activists because they had committed war crimes too. And in that situation, that isolation, everyone, the international community of all sides, from the west and the east, from the global south, were effectively glad to see the Tigers got rid of. They were very, very isolated internationally. And so the entire world stuck its finger in its ears and closed its eyes and hummed loudly. And in the words of Sir John Holmes, I should say, in the interview in the film, he actually said, in effect, I'm paraphrasing him because I can't remember his exact words, but in effect he said that we knew the Tigers were going to be defeated, and it was a question of hoping that it happened as soon as possible, with as few civilian deaths as possible. Now that failure by the United Nations and by the international community was profound and serious, and there is no doubt there is a huge culpability there. So that's I think that's the. It's helpful for me to get even into arguments about whether or not it was a genocide. As far as I'm concerned, there were terrible war crimes. There were crimes against humanity. As far as I'm concerned, there is certainly evidence to this day that the war is continuing by other means, and that one of the aims of the war is the destruction of the Tamil identity of the North and East, and that is being done through all sorts of different mechanisms, and that included physical destruction of Tamils during the war. Does that make that a genocide. It's possible. I do not take a view at this stage because I'm not a lawyer, and I don't think it's helpful for me to take a view. It's my job to say what happened.
Okay. The rights to self-determination is the democratic rights for any ethnic nations, according to United Nations (UN). We Tamil waged the war as a demand for separation, not self-determination, which is an error committed by Tamil nationalistic forces. Do you think that Tamil can still fight for their democratic rights?
I certainly, as a as a citizen of the world, as it were, I think that the right to self-determination is a fundamental right, and I think that the people in the north and the east deserve the right to self-determination, and I think that that right, that is a right, and that they should have it, and at the moment they do not have it. But beyond that, I wouldn't, what form that self-determination would or should take or could take is not really something that I would get into either, because I don't think it's helpful for me. My credibility is that I explain what happened, and to go beyond that, it seems to be, is unhelpful.
Yeah, I know. But there was a big barrier between Tamils and Sinhala, which was formed by both Tamils and Sinhala ruling class. Your Sinhala document could probably be the first document which addresses the Sinhala community to expose their Tamil issues. This is the first document in the history. But still the diaspora Tamil movements don't seem to be buying your thoughts.
Again, I must stress that it's not helpful if I get into taking sides in that kind of debate. So, and please do be careful. I'm quite happy to talk to you because I think it's important to talk to everybody, and I do not, I do not decide who I won't talk to and who I will talk to on the basis of their politics. So, but be careful that you don't sort of cast me in one way or the other, because that will make me less useful in terms of trying to get the truth out.
For your job, that's
the first point. That's just a private point between you and me. In terms of what should happen, and in terms of how why I think it's so important that this film gets out to the Sinhala community. Yes, of course, and this I will say. Yes, of course, the vast majority of people of all communities in Sri Lanka want to live in peace, and they want to live with justice, and they want to have and with democratic rights. So every community is entitled to live in peace, is entitled to live to be reconciled with its neighbours, and is entitled to have its democratic rights protected. Now, for that to happen, does require a change in. It does require significant reform, political reform, and reform of attitudes throughout the island of Sri Lanka. Whether you regard the island of Sri Lanka as two nations or one nation or what. The one thing that can be said is that there is the need of that. Now, I believe that the vast majority of Sinhala people, just as the vast majority of Tamil people, would like to live in peace. I believe the vast majority of Sinhala people, just as the vast majority of Tamil people, would like to live with democratic rights. The problem is that there has been a culture fostered, particularly by the last Rajapaksa government, which has encouraged and fostered a culture of chauvinism, ultranationalism, and racism. And that culture of chauvinism, ultranationalism, and racism is built on fear and paranoia, and also the genuine experience of the horror of the war. The genuine experience, it should not be forgotten, that for an ordinary Tamil family, an ordinary Sinhala family, sending your child to school in the fear that they might be blown up by a suicide bombing or something is very, very frightening. Now, if you combine that with deliberate government-fostered ignorance and a culture of chauvinism and triumphalism, then it becomes very dangerous. So And the only way to break through these misunderstandings and these is for people to know the truth. The only way to break through that is for Sinhala people and Tamil people to understand each other's perspective and also to understand each other's reality. Now, mainly, that is a job that actually, and I think it is undoubtedly true that the Sinhala people have been denied the truth. They have been lied to. They have been misled. And all I can do, as a journalist telling a particular story, is I can help, if you like, with the very first stage, just professionally, not with any kind of, any other kind of hat. Just it's my job. I like to think that, the film I've made, if I can get that film to ordinary Sinhala people, and ordinary Sinhala people see that film, then I believe that will help with the beginning of a process, which can lead eventually to, as I say,
to initiate the process. That's really
to lead eventually to justice. Truth is the first stage for justice, and justice is the next stage, if you like, next precondition for the kind of dramatic, bold political reforms which all the people of Sri Lanka are going to have to accept to ensure that everyone in Sri Lanka can live, has a democratic right to live peacefully as they wish.
Exactly, is Prabaharan alive? LTTE Supremo Prabaharan alive?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I do not think so. There is absolutely no evidence to suggest he's alive.
Okay, so was he killed in the battlefield?
I don't know. We looked into the death of Prabaharan. I can say for certain that some people were not killed in battle. I can say for certain that Priya was not killed in battle. She was executed. I can say for certain that Balachandran Prabaharan was executed. I can say that the evidence suggests that a lot of the bodies lined up at the end had head wounds suggesting execution. There is some evidence to suggest that Prabaharan was executed. The nature of his wound, and I'm not saying this is for definite, so please don't quote me on this, but the nature of his wound, and this is on the basis of forensic evidence supplied to us by people who analysed the imagery, would suggest that he was shot from the back of the head at close range, because the very, very large exit wound, a high velocity weapon, the very large exit wound at the front of his head indicates that. So the indications are that he was executed, but the forensic indications would suggest. Well, let me get this phrase exactly right to be accurate. The forensic evidence would be consistent with, but does not prove that he was executed from a single shot to the back of the head with a high velocity weapon.
Right.
It would suggest it doesn't. It would be consistent with, but does not prove. That would be the way to put it.
Okay, that's great. Okay. The current government, which you went and tried to meet the current president, Maithripala Sirisena, was kind of nominated by the West, right? As Mahinda Rajapaksa, the previous government, has accomplished his job allocated by the West for us.
I wouldn't put it. I'm not going to say yes or no to that. So you need to make it clear that I'm not endorsing those.
I know. Yeah. Okay. So what the question is basically, do you think that the UN and the West will forget their war crime drama?
In what sense? How do you mean? Sorry.
Basically, they will forget everything. UN and the West.
There are different elements in the West. There are different elements everywhere. The point is that there have been complex and conflicting indications throughout this, from the West and from everywhere else. Right? China and the West. The West and China, for example, were equally complicit in what happened.
Yeah.
simply into West, versus the global South. I mean, look at Venezuela, look at Cuba, who are 100% behind. Were 100% behind the Rajapaksa regime and were voting against any kind of investigation or inquiry. So it does not divide conveniently into West or East or global South or even left or right, it seemed to me, in terms of what people did. They were motivated by a variety of factors. I mean, it all comes back to politics, of course. I'm not disagreeing with that. But what I'm saying is there isn't an easy, simple dividing line in this situation.
Okay.
That would be my view.
It is not black and white, simple addition argument, isn't it? So.
I mean, if you look at what's happening in America, and I wrote about this. I don't know if you saw. I wrote a piece in Foreign Policy. Recently.
I saw that.
I mean, clearly, what is happening within America is that America once spoke. Until sort of last March, America was speaking with one voice. Now, what was happening was that the people genuinely concerned with human rights, genuinely concerned with justice, and with ending impunity, were speaking with the same voice as the people who spoke with America's political and geostrategic interests at heart. And the reason that those people, the people who spoke with America's with military and geostrategic and economic interests at heart, were quite happy to go along with the human rights arguments and quite happy to go along with the accountability arguments, because they did not like Rajapaksa. They regarded Rajapaksa as an embarrassment. They did not like a Rajapaksa's alignment with China, and so they were happy to go along with these arguments. Now, since the Sri Lankan government got in, which is much more westward leaning and India leaning, you've seen that America is no longer speaking with a united voice, and that those people in the American government, and there are people in the American government who are concerned about impunity and human rights, are still maintaining that the pressure must be kept on Sri Lanka by the international community as a whole, whereas the people on the people who represent economic and military interests are suddenly going quiet and saying, okay, well, actually, now we've got this new government, human rights don't matter so much. Now, which way that will pan out and which forces will win, remains to be seen. I personally have my fears. So that's that. I mean, that is the current situation, it seems to me.
So I mean, whatever the case, I mean, instead of telling the issues to the Western power and the people who are not directly associated with Sri Lankan people, it is if you tell the issues to the Sri Lankan singular people, we would have more positive outcomes. I think that's the reason why you produced the document in single and medium too.
I mean, it's certainly the case that the most important people in this equation in Sri Lanka
singular people
are ordinary singular people. That if the government is to be called to account. Now, previously you had a government which was very corrupt and self-serving and ultra-nationalist and chauvinistic, but it was using those actually for their own interest. Right? This government is very different, and absolutely is very different, and we should recognise it's very different, and we should recognise the things that are better about it. The restoration of the rule of the law is significant. Insofar as it's happening, and I'm not convinced it's happening as much as people are suggesting, the restrictions on the freedom of the press are better. An ultimate test of that would be whether or not they let No Fire Zone be broadcast. And at the moment, the signs are they're not going to. So it suggests that the freedom of the press announced by the Sri Lankan regime is illusory, only when it suits it. government still needs the singular vote. The Tamils who voted for it tactically. It can't do anything for the. I mean, it won't necessarily do anything for the Tamils. The people it really considers itself answerable to is its singular support, and its singular support is still, to some extent, denied the truth and still fed the same sort of chauvinistic, racist ultranationalism. And therefore, the most important thing to do, if there is to be progress, is for ordinary people to understand the truth and ordinary people to open their minds, and that's something that we hope our film will help do.
Okay. Thank you so much.